Welcome to the Josh Huisman Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to another week of the podcast. And we always have great guests here on the show. And if you watch New Hope Community Church live stream, or you are in person and you are participating in the worship services in any way, you're going to see a guy up on stage leading worship. His name is Sutton Porth, and he is here. And I finally invited him to come on here. And I think I asked you to come on here before, but
I came kicking and screaming, but thank you for having me.
yeah. And well, I'm glad to have you on here. And it is interesting to me that you are a worship leader, because you are an, I don't know if I would say an extrovert, introvert. You're just Sutton.
Yeah. I kind of adapt to my situation, I guess, because there's a lot of me that wants to be very introverted, but certain parts of my role and obviously just like being a human cause you to have to like step out of that for a little bit. So I can turn on the extroversion for a little bit, but
yeah. Well, it's great because you're able to do all the stuff that you do for worship and all that, but at the same time, you weren't like going, "Hey, I want to be on the podcast. I want to be on the podcast." You're just like, "Okay, I'll do it."
yes, I'm generally much more happy to be the one doing things behind the scenes. Like,
Well, you do a ton of stuff behind the scenes, and I'm sure we can talk about it. One of the reasons why I started this podcast, that Nick Hyder said to me one time, "I would love to know what goes into all the planning of a church worship service and all these things, what you guys talk about and all that." And then I mentioned that to you, and your response was, no, it wouldn't be interesting to anybody. That's kind of how I felt about it.
yeah, I mean, we kind of know what the messages are going to be about maybe a month in advance, like basically, but we don't have the message like nailed down until Thursday. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the prep is just like choosing songs that I think are going to work. And then most of the songs, they're all about the same thing. End of the day, like they're all about Jesus, like wanting to introduce more people to him, make him known, worship him for who he is and what he's done. So
Yeah.
it's kind of easy to connect all that together.
Yeah.
But sometimes we do plan more in advance, but
Right. Well, I think the stuff we spend the most time on it, and that's all relative when I say the most time, is really just coordinating the pieces of who's doing what, as opposed to specific songs, because I'm doing message prep and writing. I finalize all the message stuff that I'm doing. You guys have, like, we know in advance, like, for example, we're in the book of Colossians right now, and we know we're in the book of Colossians. And so you have an idea what chapters I'm going to be in, but then I don't. So we have that month or so out, but I don't finalize and say, "Here's the final message," until that Thursday before. And so you're like kind of just come to me and go, "So what's the main idea?
yeah, how are you landing the plane today?" Like,
Yeah, and so that's kind of the planning from the song side of things that go into it. And let's get into all that stuff a little bit later. But how about using this as an opportunity? We have New Hope people who listen to this. I know there's some non-New Hope people, but anybody who sees what we're doing at New Hope is going to see your face. And so, how about this mysterious man? Where did you come from? Because you've been here a couple years now.
yep, just
And
over 2 years.
What I can't even speak. What about your background a little bit?
Yes, so I came from a mystical land of football called Kansas City.
Nice.
And it's been a good few years as being a Chiefs fan, pretty diehard there. So it's fun, like football season's finally back and all that stuff. But this is after an entire lifetime of the Chiefs being horrible, which I think that you can relate to, because have you shared like who your team is?
So I haven't done it on this podcast. People familiar with me in the church know that I'm a Chicago Bears fan.
My condolences.
Yeah, and it's Sutton has to hear me cry every week, like literally just go. He has to talk me off the ledge. I don't know that you actually talk me off the ledge, or you just kind of.
I kind of encourage it.
Yeah, I guess you do, because I don't know what to do at this point. Yeah. My backup team is the Detroit Lions this year, because they've never won anything either. And I have this weird deal. Jared Goff, when they traded him from the Rams to the Lions, I was like, you know what? I want to see that guy succeed, because he just got like thrown out like he was trash.
Yeah.
And so I'm cheering for them this year, because Lord knows I can't cheer for my team.
And it's good to have somebody to watch on Thanksgiving this year.
Yes.
We're used to, like, it's the Bears that always play and the Lions that always play.
Cowboys and the
Cowboys,
Lions.
that's who.
Cowboys.
The Lions, it's just been nothing for years. So
Right.
hopefully we can at least have a game, which I guess the Lions came out pretty strong this year against my team.
The Lions have been so bad that every Thanksgiving people go, why are they playing on Thanksgiving?
Exactly.
And this year everyone's going to be like, yeah, the Lions are playing. So there you go.
Which is a sentence that has never been uttered on a podcast before.
Exactly. So,
But yes, back on topic here. So I'm from Kansas City. I grew up in a small town about an hour north of the city called Lawson. Went there all through high school. Great community. Super good family. Was brought up in the Lord. I accepted Jesus when I was about 5 years old with my mom. It was kind of a funny story. My cousin Sydney and we were all like riding in the back of the van coming home from church one night, and she like nudges me like, Sutton, you don't have Jesus in your heart. And I'm like, what?
you're 5?
Yeah, I was 5. I was like, what? What is this? So like I was obviously very torn up about it. So like went and asked my mom about like, what does it mean to accept Jesus into your heart? And like, because like you just grow up knowing that Jesus loves you. But I guess at some point that connection didn't happen yet where I knew that I had to accept him myself. So, and I don't remember a lot of my life before like 5 years old, just like my memory.
Well, right.
But like I remember that whole thing vividly, which that makes me think that it was real and genuine because like, I don't know, the more you get around church, like people sometimes say, well, kids can't accept Jesus. They don't know what they're doing. Like you just have people like detracting from it there. But I'm like, if I remember that so specifically, that tells me that it was genuine for me.
Yeah.
So that means it could be genuine for everyone.
I think so too. I think I was like 9 years old. And of course, I grew up in church, my parents being worship pastors and a part of it. But I remember being 9 years old and being in a little Sunday school room during the church service and the teacher sharing that you can know Jesus. And I started crying. I don't know Jesus. And I can't remember who it was, the teacher, but the teacher's response was, yes, you do. Bob and Mary are your parents. And it's like, well, but it was like, this is my decision.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So I agree with you. When you're a child, I vividly remember it.
Yeah.
So it's good.
So yeah, I accepted Jesus when I was 5. That didn't mean that I like knew all the answers. I wasn't living my life perfectly through elementary school and middle school.
I'm telling you, dude, it gets rough when they don't get your kids' meal right at that age.
Oh man, I'll tell you,
Life
what.
gets hard.
Tell
The
you
trials and struggles are real at that
Yes, and this is going to be like the most stereotypical musician thing you've ever heard before. But like, it wasn't until I started playing guitar that my life kind of changed, sort of thing. Because I wasn't that involved in my church before that. Like, we'd still go every week, but I didn't feel like any sort of vested interest there. But when I picked up guitar, this put the right people around me to like kind of mentor me and show me what it was like to live for Christ, like want to like be like in deeper conversation with him through prayer during your day, like going, just like doing the whole Christian walk. Because I don't know, like, again, like something didn't connect with me when it was just only coming from the pulpit, people saying all this stuff. But then when it was like somebody coming in, like from like a friend, like a mentor setting, like, hey, Sutton, this is what it looks like to live a life of prayer. This is what it looks like to like live the Christian life. That is when it started to like become more real to me. And that was only possible because like joining the bands at church and everything and like having people like Brian Nelson and Jason Ellsworth, who they were both worship leaders, worship pastors at the church I grew up in. I still look at them as mentors. I still talk to them now, like when there's things that I need some counsel on. They're people, so I can give them a lot of credit for like being there for me, but I also can like give music the credit for like kind of pushing that relationship together.
So is this when you were a teenager, like in youth group years and all that stuff?
Yeah, this is in high school. That's when I started to learn guitar and everything. So I started playing electric guitar. That's probably still my favorite musical thing to do, like over singing or acoustic or drums or whatever it is. Electric guitar has been always my favorite.
Do you play bass too?
I can fake it.
Okay.
I wouldn't. There's a difference between playing bass and being a bass player.
Okay.
I'm not a bass player.
Okay.
But I can play bass.
But yeah, anything else? Keyboards or?
That would be the worst of what we've mentioned. But
Okay.
I know what the notes are.
Okay.
I can like do chords and stuff, but like
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to just listen to me play.
I'm not hiring you in my band to play keyboards or bass. It sounds like.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay. All right. So you get doing that and you're involved in playing in youth group and things. So that is interesting because a lot of people, I think, look at churches going, I'm going to go and sit in this large group setting, large sanctuary setting. I'm going to listen to the pastor. He's going to do the message. And that's going to be like the connection and the thing that I need to really like get me engaged in Scripture and get me engaged in walking out this life as a believer in Christ. But I agree with you completely. In fact, we're even trying to push this at New Hope, saying that one-on-one connection that you can make with people and conversations and growing and learning together. And like, that sounds like was what happened with you. And
yeah, definitely. Like just going to church, putting your butt in a pew is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Like you got to be intentional with your daily life and like going to him in prayer. Like when you're feeling anxious about things, like don't wait till Sunday morning to pray.
Mm-hmm.
Like God is like here all the time. He's like ready for all that stuff. He says to bring the little and the big too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so you start playing guitar and you start doing these things in youth group, and was being a worship leader something you wanted to do, or did somebody see something in you and said, "Hey, I think you should do this"?
So the first time I ever led worship, I was always the guitar player for probably 2 years. First time I ever led worship was when the student worship leader at the time left his role. So like we showed up on a Sunday morning, it was like, there's nobody to lead worship.
Okay.
I guess I'm going to do it today.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't say anybody saw that in me at the beginning, but it was just the sort of thing where I guess like the Lord ordained that to happen, where I was at the right place at the right time and decided to lead worship. And there's still a video of that circling that my mom's friends will send to me once a year. And like the first time I did it, it is so bad.
Yeah.
It is so bad.
I'm not agreeing. I wasn't there,
Yeah.
but
you haven't seen the video. Otherwise you'd be agreeing with me. But yeah, I've definitely come a ways in vocally and all that stuff, just cause that was never something I had practiced before. So that, yeah.
Well, and you going back to in the beginning when I said your personality, I will say this, having gotten to know you over the last couple of years, you're definitely a guy who's like a get things done person. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but you're just kind of like, hey, there's a job, I'm going to do the job. But you're not one who's like, you need me to do this job. I'll jump in there. I'll be the guy who's the face out front. I'll do you're not that guy.
No.
So that the way that came about seems to make sense. That like, hey, somebody needs to do this, and so
Yeah.
I'm here, so I'll step in that role.
Yeah, and I guess leadership has always been a sort of thing that I'm like decent at interpersonally, like being able to like be an encourager for other people. So in that respect of it, that came to me like the leading groups came easier than like the music, than the vocal stuff, because I wouldn't say that like vocals are my best thing by any stretch. I'm a guitar player. I can sing, though. It's just that's what I've had to practice more than anything else, is like trying to be a better vocalist, like pitch and all that stuff. That didn't come super naturally to me, so I've had to practice that.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do a good job with it, and so you've shared that with me before, and I've always been impressed and happy with your leading and singing and all the things that you do. When I think of worship leaders as a whole, I started learning guitar and being involved in worship when I was in college. I had sung and done some things before with my family growing up and knew that was something I wanted to do. When I got into college and I started learning to play guitar a little bit, I know just enough chords and things to be dangerous. I'm not a guitar player like any of you guys are or any of that. I can write songs. I can do all that fun stuff.
You're a very good songwriter, though.
But yeah. Thank you. But like, I'll just say my experience here, and you tell me if it was same or different. When I started leading worship and being in that role, I did it because we needed a worship leader, and I can do that. But as time went on in ministry and I matured in my faith and my belief, then that transformed into a desire to see other people. It doesn't have to be me leading. It doesn't have to be me getting that spotlight or anything. But there was a wisdom or an experience maybe that God was doing in me that said, how can I bring others into this?
Yeah.
And how did that go for you as you were growing in that role?
Well, obviously, I wouldn't have been given opportunities if people were hogging the spotlight all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So we always used to do this thing with my old boss at that church. His name is Brian. I talked about him earlier. He used to do this thing called Brian Gets Hit by a Bus week, where like
That's good.
So if he was going on vacation or something, like he knew that he was going to be gone, he would like a month out, like say, hey, Brian's going to get hit by a bus this week, so you're going to have to take over. And those are like what stick out to me as like when I learned the most, like when it's like somebody declines at Saturday night before, and like you got to like figure out who's going to play bass. It's always the bass player. I'm just kidding. But yeah, if people hadn't stepped aside and developed me to be a leader, I wouldn't be here now. So I think that's where a lot of my call to ministry came from, is like, because I started my first vocational ministry jobs there were 2 of them, and I was student worship leaders. Because like what I was talking about earlier, that is where like I started to take my faith more seriously. It was in high school, and it was worship music and everything that helped bring that about in me personally.
Yeah.
So that's something I want other people to have the opportunity to.
Yeah. So what was the church that was giving you this opportunity? What was the name of the church?
So the first church I worked for was called Good Shepherd United Methodist. It was in Kansas City, north of town. I worked there just part-time. It was like 3 hours a week, just going and leading their Wednesday night youth services, like doing the worship there. So I like brought in a band of the kids who were there. So we would often have a drummer, acoustic guitar, and a piano player. So like no bass or anything. We were just doing the best we could with what we had, sort of thing. And it was good. I definitely enjoyed it. I chose to do that job over pursuing the jazz band scholarship that I was offered in my undergrad, which...
Interesting.
Yeah. It was just, I didn't feel like I wanted to continue in like the concert band, jazz band type thing. I decided that I enjoyed what I was doing in ministry more than that.
Yeah. Do you ever look back on that and wonder?
Not for a second.
Not for a second.
No.
Okay. That's good. Okay. So Good Shepherd, part-time, whatever. Yeah. And then we go to?
So then I went to Pleasant Valley Baptist Church, which is in Liberty, Missouri. That is actually a church I grew up in too, which is where I was first given those opportunities. That's where most of my like mentors and friends and everything were. So like when the student worship job opened up there, it was like, oh, well, I guess I'm going to apply there. And that ended up being quite a bit more. It's a bigger church than Good Shepherd was. So that was like 20 hours a week.
It's a bigger church than most churches in America, right? A couple thousand people?
Yeah.
Yes. So
like the student ministry probably had like 100 or 200 kids. So I would like figure out worship on the Wednesday night services and the Sunday morning services. But that was like my first job where I had like an office and things like that. So I definitely was starting to like look at worship ministry as a career at that point, because I was a sophomore in college when I took that job. Yeah, I was probably halfway through my sophomore year, and that was like 20 hours a week. So I was spending quite a bit of time there when you're like a full-time student trying to do all that stuff too.
Yeah. So how many years did you do the student ministry thing? Because to me, the follow-up, because eventually when you came, to New Hope, you had been the primary worship leader of Pleasant Valley, a big church, considered a mega church in our country, in every country really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty cool, like kind of homegrown, and then given this role in this church. And how did that come about?
Yeah. So I was the student worship leader for a little over 2 years at Pleasant Valley. And that changed when Jason Ellsworth, the main worship leader at Pleasant Valley, decided to leave to like plant a church. He was kind of feeling called away from worship ministry into being a senior pastor. So he left to plant a church in Kansas City, which left that job open. And Brian, who was the worship pastor, approached me and was like, Sutton, is this something that you would want to do? Like, we can move you to full time and you can do the student stuff on Wednesday nights, but then you'll do the weekend worship on Saturday and Sundays with the main services. So that was definitely a shock when that happened, because Jason was one of the people who had like kind of mentored me along the way. He was the person who I would always go to. He and Brian were. So like when it was me taking over for Jason, I was pretty stressed out about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I was starting to feel the pressure.
Well, I'm sure they probably surrounded you with support, right?
Oh, yeah,
Like
definitely.
different to help you along the way. I'm sure it wasn't all on your shoulders or anything like that.
Yeah, and we had a tech director who's full-time, and Brian, who was the creative arts pastor, he was there to like kind of mentor me and help me out along the way. And we even had people who would like direct all the vocal rehearsals. We had people who direct the orchestra. And so that staff was quite a bit different than what we do here at New Hope.
Yeah. Well, we could probably get to that too, because the transition from working for such a large church like that to coming to New Hope, where we're just more a medium to small size church, it's a big change, right? Yeah. All the different where you had people in those roles to do those things. That's the challenge. And I mean, if we were probably be honest, I would never put words in your mouth, because you don't complain like I do about Bears teams or anything like that. But I know that's hard. And to have to wear a lot of different hats, you know, in the role that we do, especially with this. I mean, look at us right now on this podcast, and you look at our live stream, and Sutton oversees, along with Austin, majority of that stuff, and making sure that these things go off, and that's got to be tough. And, you know, I don't know if you want to speak to anything on that, but I know that was probably a big transition.
Yeah, it definitely was. And before we get there, I kind of want to talk a little bit about that story.
Yeah,
because
sure.
It's one of the most direct testimonies of God like provided in my life up to that point. So
maybe I'll ask you the direct question, because you go from Pleasant Valley, and then here you are in Nashville, or New Hope is in Brentwood, which is a suburb about 10 miles south of Nashville. And I have my side of the story too. And so obviously you've been our worship leader now for over 2 years. And how did that come about? Like, why would you leave a great situation to come here?
So when I became full-time at Pleasant Valley, I was kind of like, all right, I've accomplished all my goals. It's like, this is what I was striving to get to for the past 5
At the age of 25?
I would
accomplished my goals.
I would have been 21 at the time,
oh,
22.
My. Okay.
Which tells you a lot about how big my head was back then. Thinking that I had all the answers, I could take care of everything. So I bought a house out in Liberty, which is the town that Pleasant Valley was in, and I was like settled. This is where I'm going to be for a while. I'm 20 minutes from my parents. All my family is right here. All of my friends are in Liberty, and I love my job that I'm doing. But then, I'm going to say but. This is a good thing. I met my wife, Madison, but then I met my wife. No.
Okay.
No, Madison and we met at our undergrad school, William Jewell, while I was moving into that full-time role. And the joke is always, you buy a house and then your wife comes in and it's not her house, so you get to buy a new house. But that's not exactly what happened. But we were kind of feeling the pull that law school was going to be the next step for Madison. Like after we got married, we just decided that after she was done with undergrad, she was going to be going to law school. There weren't many great options in Kansas City for her. Like it just wasn't quite working out with like the caliber of school she wanted to go to, like the money and all that stuff. So we kind of came to the realization right after we got married that, oh wow, we're going to have to move. I'm going to have to leave all of my settledness and security behind. And that kind of took me into a bit of a spiral because, like I said, I was one that always wanted to be in control, have stuff planned out. But then we were going to have to make a change here. So we were down between two schools. It was either Vanderbilt, where she ended up going, or the University of Minnesota up in Minneapolis. So we went and like demoed both cities. My poor in-laws, they took us up to Minnesota to check it out in December of.
Oh my!
It was great. There was like 3 feet of snow on the ground. I loved it.
Yeah,
I loved the cold.
Of course, in December there, everything's underground, right? Like in the downtown area, it's all underground.
But it was during COVID too, so most of the tunnels were closed. So you had to brave the elements.
Oh, okay. Okay. So University of Minnesota in Minneapolis?
Yep.
Or okay.
Yep. So that would have been in Minneapolis or Vanderbilt here. And just to be frank, like the Minneapolis, that was the choice to make, like money wise and everything. Like it was a pretty highly ranked school and they gave very good scholarship offer. So I was like, I guess that's what we're doing. We're going to move up to the Great White North. But then Madison kind of felt like maybe Vanderbilt would be a better choice. Like she was kind of feeling the pull down here way more than I was at that point. And we ended up, so there was this TV show that we were watching. It was the night before. So we were like praying about it, like trying to decide right before the deadline which one we were going to go with. And I hadn't been applying for jobs either place because we didn't know where we were moving.
Well, your wife's going to be a lawyer. You don't have to work.
Well, there's still a lot of law school bills to happen before that.
Okay.
Yeah. But so we were watching this show, and it goes to the next episode, and like it was like this show about like supernatural stuff. It's silly. I'm not endorsing it, but the main character like looks at the screen after they're saying like a werewolf attack or something happened, and he like looks straight at the camera and is like, "Stay out of Minneapolis." And it was like the night before we had to decide. It was like seriously,
Stay out of Minneapolis.
Word for word. Like we were like looking at both websites. We had like up on our computers, like looking at houses in Minneapolis versus Nashville and things like that. And like the guy stayed in Minneapolis. It was the craziest thing I've ever experienced in my life. And who am I to say that God was not speaking through that show? I guess I doubt that with every fiber of my being. But we sang this song called More Than Able. Is like, who am I to deny what the Lord can do? I guess he can speak through anything. So we were just like, wow. Since we had kind of been feeling that call anyway, we were leaning the Nashville direction, but there was still like the scholarship and everything that was really pulling me more so than Madison up to Minneapolis. We were like, all right, I guess we're going to do Nashville. So we kind of right after that, we paid the deposit to Vanderbilt, and we were like, all right, let's figure out what Sutton's going to do for work, where we're going to live, all that stuff. And so I took a few jobs. There were like no churches hiring for my role, like when we started looking, or at least I didn't find them because it was pretty dire. It was looking like I was not going to be able to stay in ministry anymore because we'd have to have something to put food on the table. So I was applying for a few different like bank jobs, trust companies, things like that, really fun stuff.
Yeah, because your degree is in business, right?
Yeah, I have a business administration degree and a communication and religion minor from my undergrad. But yeah, just nothing was working out. And I talked about Jason Ellsworth, the guy who was the previous worship leader at Pleasant Valley. So we used to like get coffee, and like he was still like kind of mentoring me during this time. And like we were at a meeting, and I was like trying to explain like all these things that I was trying to figure out. And he was like, Sutton, you are just trying to control everything. Like, have you just decided to like stop trying to control stuff and let God provide for you? And I hadn't. So it took him kind of calling that out in me to like be like, all right, we're just going to do this and going to allow God to provide for that. So I just spent time in prayer, like following that night over the next few days, just like trying to let the Lord kind of take over and all that. And then lo and behold, Madison finds the job online for New Hope Community Church, looking for a creative arts pastor. And we apply, and then you get back to me while we're out on the golf course one day. we were walking the back nine at Excelsior Springs Golf Club, and we got an email from Josh Huisman. That's what I thought it was. Josh Huisman.
Sure, whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. And and then we ended up coming down here and interviewing and all that stuff, and we loved everybody that we met here and getting to know you guys, and it all worked out.
Yeah, what's crazy, you know, I remember this. We're just talking about a few years ago here, so it's all pretty fresh still. Is you know, we had put out this position for a worship pastor, and the creative part of it was basically because you're wearing a lot of different hats. I mean, with the live stream and the studio that we're sitting in right now, you oversee that, and it's a lot of work, and it's hard, and it takes a very special, talented person to do it. And I think at the time, tell me if I'm wrong, but you even admitted like there was going to be a big learning curve for you to learn a lot of this stuff.
Sure.
Of which you have, and you've been awesome at it. But I remember that was a little tentative on your part, I think, at the time. But we had been receiving resumes from different people, and we had put it out there, and I can't remember how long we had it listed. And all the resumes we got in, it was like nobody was a fit. It just wasn't anyone there. And so we sat down with the staff of who we had, and you know, as we just looked at it, And the staff was going to kind of, because we as a church staff, we're here together with each other all week long and doing the work that we do. And so we wanted to make sure that we're getting along with the person, and we want to have a good relationship and all that before we even go to elders and deacons and committees and all that stuff. And we were like, here you go. Now, another thing that's just coming to mind is I was not involved in your process.
You were not.
At all.
I thought that was so strange.
Yes. The staff that we had, I was like, you guys, you bring whoever you think the good resumes are. And so they came to me and they said, we're not seeing anyone. And I looked and I said, well, I guess we could go with so-and-so or so-and-so. And then the staff would rightfully, so we're going to just say, I guess we could. And so then we were like, well, how about we just put this on hold and not recommend anybody to the elders and just kind of just wait. And the next day is when we got your resume.
Yeah. So I guess we both find ourselves in a hopeless spot. And
we did not settle. You may have settled for us, but we didn't settle for you. So, but yeah, and then that began the whole process. And, that was such a weird time too, because was that at the end of 2020 or the beginning? No, it was 2021.
It was 2021. I was probably interviewing in May, and we ended up moving down here in June.
Yeah. But it was a weird time. I mean, everybody just coming out of that weird 2020 year. And, we were even, as our church, we were going through more changes with our staff and people going in and out, and everyone's kind of settling. And so yeah, when I finally did get involved in the interview and stuff with you, I was like, I like this guy. He's pretty good, So,
yeah, I remember asking, because the first interview was on Zoom just with the staff. I remember they were sitting out on the cafe tables, and I was like, so kind of what's the vision for the church over the next 5 years and stuff? And they were like, oh, look, I was like, that's more of a question for Josh. And then you were walking by, and we're like, and then he came and gave a good answer. Be like, I guess I'll chime in here. So it's I don't know if you were sitting off the camera.
No, listening. I think I happened to just be walking. I knew they were talking to you, it's funny because looking back on it, I was like, yeah, I probably should have been much more involved in that process. But coming through that, to be honest, there was just some internal things in our staff before that. It was really important to me that I not be the one who's heavily involved in choosing our worship leader to start. I want us to be a team.
Oh yeah,
and let the
definitely.
team.
I work with people other than you more than I work with you, so it's important that we get along and everything. That it's a good culture fit and everything.
Yeah, and it's turned out to be great. And so yeah, but that is funny how God works those things out. I know it's not a same story. I've told it before, but even when I came down here and I interviewed at New Hope back in 2000, it was early 2006, and the interview that I had at the church did not go well. It was just a different time. The church had gone through some tough stuff, and so there was a lot of raw emotions from the previous youth pastor who was here and leading into my time. And then there was a difference of opinion of whether I should be the guy or not, whatever, which is totally fine. That's what happens in an interview process, right? And because it didn't go well, I remember, so Sarah and I had to drive all the way back to Chicago. So we had this 8-hour drive going back. And that whole 8 hours, I was like, not happening. We got a job up here. We're going to do that. And then we got home and Sarah's like, so what are we going to do? I was like, we're going to go to New Hope.
Wasn't it something she was giving birth to a child?
Okay, so that was the call to set up the interview.
Oh, okay.
That's when she had Jordan.
Yes,
in the hospital. Yeah. They called, and she had just had the baby, and not where she's in labor. And they called, but she had the baby, and they called while we're sitting in the hospital because you have to wait a day or so. Yeah.
I envisioned it was she was like, push, and you were like, hey, honey, we just got a call from.
Hold on, can you put that on hold for a second?
Yeah, just a second, I got to take this call.
Yes, this is very important. It's a Tennessee number. Yeah. But no, it wouldn't. That would have made her my first wife, and I'd probably be looking for a second wife if I did something like that. So
that's funny.
That would not have been good. So how about this? Maybe we could ask these questions that are kind of minutia to us, but maybe people are interested in all that. So as a worship pastor, what goes into selecting a song, or what is do you have a process? What's your 5-year vision for the worship ministry? What are all these things? What process do you go through when you're looking at songs?
Yeah, I start by just like listening to whatever new things have come out, and then oftentimes I'll listen to a whole new album from whether it's Elevation or whoever it is, and be like, yeah, really none of those songs are quite going to work for us. Just like culturally, New Hope is quite a bit different than what would be going on at Elevation Church or at Bethel, or it's just a very different church culturally. So you got to choose songs that our people will connect with, sort of thing. And a lot of times those are the ones that could be on the radio. A lot of times those could be hymns that haven't been sung in our church for a long time, but people know pretty well. A lot of times they could be from those bigger churches like Elevation, like More Than Able is from Elevation. And it's just when we were in that sermon series at the time, it was just like, who am I to deny what the Lord can do? That was just like a defining.
Yeah. I'm talking about the God Help Us series, the prayer series
exactly.
we were doing.
So that was a rallying thing that I thought that our church should be singing. Like, who am I to deny what the Lord can do? I believe that God is able to provide for us.
Yeah.
Obviously, you look at the lyrics, read through, and make sure that it lines up with Scripture, because there are a few times that we like looked at songs that were very popular, but then you like read the lyrics and like, is that totally true? Like, is that what the Bible says? So then we don't do those.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah. And we talk about that every once in a while. We don't a whole lot have to do that, but every once in a while there'll be a song. And I know you'll send me some lists of 4 or 5 songs and what do you think of these? And I'll give my input a little bit here and there. And, music is so hard. I talked a little bit about that. I led worship and did some things in the past, but there's one job that I would never want to do in a church, and that's a worship pastor job. Because music is hard. Everyone has different tastes. Everyone wants it to be a different style of song, whether it be a hymn or an upbeat or slow or a liturgical song, or everyone has a thought on whether it's too loud or whether it's too soft or whether it needs this instrument or whether it needs that instrument. Yeah. And I was
music is a very subjective thing.
Yes. And I always explain it like this. If you and I were to get in our cars, we're not putting on the same song and we're not playing it at the same volume. So it becomes a very subjective. Everyone has a thought on this, right?
That is true. And people have a choice when they get into their car.
Right.
They choose what song and how loud it is.
So the idea that we could ever walk into a room where we're coming into worship and think that what we're going to select or what we're going to do is going to be something that's pleasing to everyone, or whether it's volume, whether it's a song, any of that stuff, it's like it's not going to happen. Yeah. So my then thought was, I'm out. I'll just preach, and I'll let guys like Sutton do that for sure. And but man, so anyway, you do a noble thing when you. I
love what I get to do. Yeah, I just get to play music with my friends, singing to Jesus. It's good stuff.
Well, I love listening to worship music, and I could ask you what your favorite is. We've talked a while. I love Shane and Shane's Psalms stuff.
Oh yeah.
The last one that they just did that we play, All Creatures. What was the name of that album? You remember? We need somebody here looking this whole thing up online to have it
really quick.
But it has Unto Him on there, which is one of my favorites. It has All Creatures, which I love. It has
Psalms, Hymns, and Spiritual Songs, Volume 2.
Volume 2?
Yes.
They've done multiple of the Psalms and stuff, so I love them. I'm listening to Leland quite a bit now. I always listen. You sent me the one that... you didn't send me Chris Tomlin's version, but there's another guy. Holy Forever,
yeah.
John Mark.
Yeah, so that was the Worship Initiative. They're actually, Shane and Shane's organization, like a worship school, is the Worship Initiative. So they kind of remake songs that a lot of the popular artists may be putting out, but they either simplify it or change the style a bit to make it more palatable for like the average church to be able to do. Not that they make the songs like super simple or easy or anything like that, but they make it work in the styles that we can often pull off more than the club bangers that Elevation maybe.
The club bangers. Okay. Yeah, I've never heard that term before, but we'll go ahead. We'll go with that. So I know, and I always listen to, when I'm listening to those songs and thinking like what would translate in for our church setting, because that does play a real big role in our church setting. What songs would do a good job? Because our job is to usher people into worship and to do that. It's not to have a concert, or even in my role as the primary pastor is not to be a motivational speaker, but to preach what God's word says, and
that's what one of the great things are about those Psalms albums that Shane and Shane put out, because it's almost, if not word for word, it's very close to word for word out of the Psalms that it's referring to. Like one that we use often is Psalm 34. That's I sought the Lord and he answered me. Mm-hmm. And it's just so good, like how they creatively like set those Psalms to music. So it's almost like we are singing the same songs that the Israelites were singing. Yeah,
that is one of my favorites. And, we've had a few times, the titles of the songs don't come to mind. We've had a few times when there's been songs we really liked that just don't work lyrically.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And it has a great melody, but, that's just kind of how it goes sometimes, but the truth is important.
Yeah.
Right. And so
it's the most important.
Yeah. And so we spend time thinking about those things as well. So, hey, a question that popped in my head was, when you left Missouri and you came here to Nashville, is your whole family back in Missouri?
They are. And to pay my mother back for stealing me, I thought that we could mention... We could plug her company, Paisley Candles, so you do not have the opportunity to smell these glorious fall flannel, because it's fall, y'all, if you haven't realized.
Yes. So, Melissa is your mom's name, right?
Yes.
And she has this company, the Paisley, and we'll go back. I'll hold it up. You don't have to, take my spot. And she sent these candles. This is fall flannel. I got one that's called cinnamon bun. Oh my goodness. Okay. And yes, so I have these going every time we do these podcasts because it inspires me. Yeah. It doesn't feel like fall right now in Nashville. It's 90 degrees.
Yeah, we'll pretend that it's fall.
Yes.
Because the pumpkin spice lattes are out now.
We had one day where it felt like fall. And I was like, this is amazing. And then fall said, I'm going to step back out of here. So anyway, thank you. The Paisley. You can go to paisley.com or wherever candles are sold.
Yeah.
So mom and dad are back. What about Madison's parents? Where are they?
They're in Springfield, Missouri, which is like 3 hours south of Kansas City. And her whole family's in the Springfield area, and mine's all in the Kansas City area. So we get to do that glorious 3-hour drive every time we go back to Missouri, because it's hard to choose one place to go.
Yeah.
It's like right on the edge of that.
Were there any tears shed when the moving van headed south down 65?
You've met my mother.
I'm going to go with yes on that one. All right. So, well, thank you very much. We very much appreciate. But you do have, and Madison's parents as well, but I mean, they're like the nicest people in the world.
And they love getting to come down here and see our new church family and everything. They only shed tears just because they miss us. They don't shed tears because they're like worried that this isn't where we're supposed to be. Mm-hmm. Like, we know that God led us to this exact situation. So we have just this overwhelming peace about where we are in life right now. So
yeah, that's great. All right. So let me put you on the spot. All right. You didn't know this was coming. So you were threatening me with some questions beforehand, but I'm going to, since I had a question pop in my head, what is the most challenging part of being a worship leader in a church?
I think it's pretty similar to what you brought up earlier about we can never please everybody, do exactly what the songs that they would want us to do at the volume they would want us to do in the style that they would want, because there's always people who would prefer you do all hymns. There's always people who would prefer that you do all for King and Country. So we have to not ignore them, but we have to go to God go and ask the Lord where he is wanting us to lead his church, and just take that direction as well as we can, while still trying to usher everybody into God's presence as best we can. So I think choosing that balance is the hardest part overall of being a worship leader. The hardest part of my job is I oversee the production stuff as well as the worship, like the music. So all of the tech and everything, I take care of all of that. So the hardest part of that is I am almost always leading worship. So if things start to go wrong and haywire during the service, it can get a little stressful because like I'm trying to be pulled in different places at once.
Yeah.
So personally, that is the most difficult part.
Yeah, and anything.
But I have a wonderful team of volunteers who make everything possible that we do here at New Hope. Like if you've ever come to one of our services, you probably wouldn't know that things may be crazy behind the scenes because they do such a great job.
Yeah, they do, and you do, and it is a blessing, and it's tough because, I'm old enough to remember when this church didn't have any of this stuff, and services were being run on a old PC with running Windows 97 that was getting corrected, and you start adding all these technical components and you start doing things and they inevitably break or get damaged or whatever. Matter of fact, we just had a lightning strike not too long ago that wiped out a large part of this stuff that we're currently using, and they have to go, oh, are you kidding? It's like just when we're hitting stride.
Yeah.
These things
And that
happen.
was the craziest thing ever because it wasn't through like the power. Like everything was on surge protectors. That lightning strike, it hit the low voltage. It's called an SDI cable that carries a video signal. And those happen to run outside of the building for a little bit because it can't go through the firewall. It's the whole thing. So like the lightning must have been close enough to the building that it caught one of the SDI cable runs that goes into the camera, into the switcher and everything. All the TVs in the lobby had to replace all those converters and everything. There was nothing we could do to prevent that. So I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And you're able to pull together a team of volunteers. We have some awesome people who help out and do things, Like David Young is one who comes to mind completely, who he's owner of Paramount Media Group, does a whole bunch. There are so many great people who help us with that stuff. But yeah, for what you do, it's stressful to have that, to wear those different hats but then that whole team, it just comes together and makes it happen. And it's really cool. So it's a change and much different than maybe before. So here's the big question. So I asked you, what's the hardest part of worship and all that? Let's step out of this for a minute. All right, let's go back to the year 2015 or 2016 in the NFL draft. And the Bears had the second overall. No, they had the third overall, and they traded up to number 2. Mm-hmm. And they drafted Mitch Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. And your team, the Kansas City Chiefs, then traded up, and they drafted Sir Patrick Mahomes. So my question to you is, if you had to do it over again, would you want Trubisky or Mahomes for the Kansas City Chiefs, man?
All I know is that the Chiefs have seemed to be ordained to be in a good position right now.
Oh,
I wouldn't change a thing.
How many Super Bowls have they won in the last?
2. They've been in 3.
They've been in 3 and they've won 2.
They've won 2. They lost to Brady.
Yeah. Maybe that answers the question you asked us earlier today. Sutton asked me and my boys, if knowing what we know now, would you take Tom Brady? Would you draft Brady or would you draft Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback?
And I feel like that's a very hard question because Patrick probably has a little bit more talent, raw talent than Brady did, but obviously Brady had something figured out to be the greatest of all time.
To be the greatest?
Because he's the greatest of all time right now.
So at what point, what would Mahomes need to do to surpass Brady to become the greatest of all? Is it 7 Super Bowls? Is it a Super Bowl thing or is it a statistics thing? Or
I think as long as he doesn't get to 7 Super Bowls, I don't know if he'll be able to pass Brady as the greatest of all time. Mm-hmm. But I would say there's probably a little bit more potential to do that as long as he stays healthy, keeps having a good coach around him, because Brady always had Belichick, but I guess he didn't need Belichick with the Buccaneers. So
Okay.
there's something special about him.
I guess there is. So long story short is Trubisky's out of the equation at this point.
Yeah, I wouldn't choose him.
All right. So Mitch, if you are listening right now, I just want you to know I supported you and I have your back. Okay. So I don't appreciate your tone.
So let me ask you that. Would you choose Patrick Mahomes or Mitchell Trubisky because he's watching right now?
Okay, so I have nothing against any of Mitch Trubisky or anything like that. But the only thing I can say for sure is this. When the Bears did that and they traded up and drafted Trubisky, I was like, who? And I was at a conference in Atlanta, and I remember calling my boys who were younger, obviously, much younger, before their high school days. And I was like, they're like, this is awesome. I was like, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't know I don't even know this guy. He's played 1 year in college. All right. So anyway, yeah. So that probably answers that question at all. Although I will say Deshaun Watson, I was more like, why wouldn't we take Deshaun Watson? But anyway, so tell us. So Madison has one more year of law school at Vanderbilt. So she had 3 years, and then after that, she has this job that she's got lined up to be a lawyer and all that. So what is as we bring this to a close, what has your Nashville experience been like? What do you think of the whole thing?
So I still have yet to do Pedal Tavern. Never gotten on one of the party buses.
Don't ever do that. Ever.
But yeah, Madison and I, we live a little closer to downtown than Brentwood, so we get to deal with some more of the stereotypical Nashville things. It seems like most people at New Hope don't like to go much north of Brentwood for most things, but we really like Nashville a lot. It's fun just to be able to go downtown, just hang out. There's so much to do, even outside of country music, outside of the tourist stuff. It's just a great city that's growing, lots of people moving in, but it seems like it's a very transitional city. So this is the negative thing that I would say is we've had a few people who have been around that became good friends, but they decide that Nashville's just kind of like a transition for them. They come for a couple of years, then move on. So we have no intention of doing that as of right now, but
yeah. Well,
it's been the hardest thing.
It is. And one of the biggest challenges, if we were, talking about church and doing church in this area, one of the things I've just said to friends and people before is this is one of the hardest areas to lead a church or just be a part of a pastoral staff as a church. Especially New Hope and our size church where we're surrounded by, I've joked and said I could throw a baseball. Maybe when I was younger, I could throw a baseball and hit 4 or 5 mega churches that are right within just a couple mile radius that are just huge. And one thing I think I even said to you, we have Church of the City down the street, and Brentwood Baptist and Bumsey, Cross Point, all these different ones. And I think I even said to you, "Do you get intimidated easily?" And you're like, "Why?" I said, "Well, at the time, I was like, well, because All Sons and Daughters leads worship at the church down the street. Chris Tomlin's leading worship this Sunday at Church of the City, and so on. It's like, as a church, you can go, all right, well, we need to compete. We need to get people, and you're like, don't even go that route. We're not going to do that. But it makes it challenging in this area because people are transitional. Like if they're still living here or not, they go, well, I'm going to church hop. Or other people, because of jobs and cost of living, they go, hey, we did Nashville for a year or two, and now we're going to go move over here. And so it makes it tough to grow deep relationships with people.
Yeah, and when it comes to that competition that you were talking about there, I think it just comes down to my definition of excellence is doing the best you can with the time and resources that you have. Because if any of us had unlimited time and resource, you could just do anything imaginable. But we do live in a finite world right now. So we have this much in the budget. We have these many people. We have this many hours to take care of this task. So we're just going to do the best we can with the time and resources.
Amen. And I love it that we as a church, I love who we are, currently. I love everyone on our staff and how we work together. And then even with you, as you've been here a couple years now and obviously feel more comfortable in who you are and the things that you do with sharing scripture. I send you Instagram things every once in a while about worship pastor stuff. And one of the things you don't do is, you share scripture and Sutton prays does things between songs to really invite people into worship, but you don't give messages.
Oh.
So you could tell that you don't desire to be a senior pastor one day.
I do not feel that call in my life.
Yeah. So I don't ever have that competition going on or anything like that, which is kind of fun. But one final thing, if you were just going to say about your role or the things that you're doing, somebody poured into you and helped you. Do you turn around and are you doing that now? Like, what are some things you're doing to kind of help the next generation?
Yeah. And obviously none of us are going to be here forever. So if you and I decide you preach every Sunday, I lead worship every Sunday and Wednesday, that's probably the easiest thing that we can do because we know that it'll be up to a certain standard. But one day you are going to move on. One day I'm going to move on, whether we want to or not. Mm-hmm. And the church is still going to be here. So we need to be doing what we can to develop the next generation. And that's what's so great about having the student worship set up down in the youth building on Wednesday nights is that I get to develop the younger people who are one day going to just take the totem pole from us and
take the mantle.
Yeah.
The mantle of leadership. And you're doing it too. That's why I just mentioned that. And I'm so thankful for that as well. That, the pulpit here, the platform here is not territorial, but it's very much it's a God-given thing. And so I appreciate how you help a lot of our young people do it. And I tell people this when they walk up and down create Hope, the hallway that we have here. But you do this in your role overseeing all this stuff. And I'll tell people here, we often have young people, high school kids, and who are involved in our live stream and our production, who are directing video or directing audio, and Sutton is involved with getting them scheduled and kind of helping training them or assigning someone, hey, train these people. And we get these kids involved and we want to see that next generation be used.
Yeah.
And so it's cool that you do that. So any final thoughts or things, parting words you could let our audience know?
I don't know if I have anything. It never came up, but I had my favorite scripture that I was going to share. So I guess I'll just share it now. It's Proverbs 28:1. Only the foolish man runs when no one's chasing him.
That's a good one. Okay. I should probably not listen to your advice on that one. Probably could use.
Well, that's what we call taking it out of context.
Okay. That's good. Oh, man. Well, thank you for being on here. Thank you for everything that you do, and I appreciate you. And also just give thanks for our working relationship, and I'm blessed by you all the time. So if your guitar playing and all that was the best thing about you, that'd be great, but you're even a better person than that. So, and we didn't even say that this one final thing. So Madison will often do our hosting here at the church, and every time she does the hosting and says welcome to people and shares a couple things, there's always rave reviews that Madison's amazing.
Madison's so great, we know.
It's always awesome. And so anyway, Madison is great too.
Yeah, and I will say one thing that I've had to develop more than anything else, and you probably noticed it as you listen to me talk for an hour here, is public speaking and communicating is not my strongest suit in the world, and that just happens to be something that Madison's very good at. And she's been a great person I can go to practice things with, help write things out, and continue to be a better communicator in front of larger groups. Mm-hmm. So I can thank her for that. Yeah.
Well, one thing, and she is awesome at that, but you sell yourself short on that one. You've gotten obviously much better at that and the things that you're doing. One final thing, and this will be the last thing I'm going to say, that Sutton, we didn't even talk about this, but he mentioned I was a good songwriter. Sutton's an awesome songwriter as well. And he has put out a bunch of his own songs over the past year or so.
Yeah.
That just go to any streaming site and you can go listen to those songs. And just his name, Sutton Porth, SuttonPorth. And
got it.
Yeah, there's singles out there. There's an EP that you did.
Yeah, there's 5 songs out there. They're just fun songs, things that, and Madison actually helped write those. She wrote most of the lyrics and came up with it. I just got to put it to music.
Mm-hmm.
But it's fun. It's a fun thing that we get to do to just collaborate with each other, do some write some songs, like record them, put them out there. So
Yeah.
hope you enjoy it.
You should go check them out. And in fact, when you stop this podcast, go put Sutton Porth in your playlist and have them be a part of that. So Sutton, thank you so much. Really appreciate
Thank you.
And you're a blessing to me and a blessing to this church. So thank you. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening this week. And we got new episodes every Monday. So come back and check us out. Have a great week.